The deadliest wars in history have names every schoolchild knows. World War I, World War II. But buried in the census books of medieval China, there is a war the West has never heard of. A war that, if its shattered census books can be believed, erased 1 out of every 6 human beings alive on Earth. It began at the peak of a golden age, in the largest, richest, most dazzling city on the planet, with a 400-pound general dancing for his emperor. How does that become this? This is the Anlushan rebellion, and the most shocking part of this story isn't even the number. The year is 755. China under the Tang dynasty. Chang'an, the capital, over 1 million people at a time when London was a muddy village. Persian merchants, Japanese students, poets drunk in the wine houses. Every road in Asia ended here. At the center of it all, Emperor Xuanzong. More than 40 years on the throne. He built this golden age. And then he stopped ruling it. He had fallen, catastrophically, for his own son's wife, laundered into his palace through a sham religious retirement. Yang Guifei. The government went to her kinsman, Yang Guozhong, a street gambler holding a chancellor's seal, and the northern frontier went to the dancer. Anlushan, Sogdian by his father, Turkic by his mother, an orphan from the borderlands who clawed his way up from market translator to warlord. 3 military districts, 180,000 of the empire's finest troops, all answering to one man. At court, he played the fool, 400 pounds of belly, spinning the Sogdian whirl like a tornado, the emperor's beloved pet barbarian. Yang Guifei even adopted him as her son. He was pushing 50. She was 32. Yang Guozhong hated him and whispered the same warning over and over. Anlushan will rebel. He said it so often, the old emperor stopped listening. In the end, anyone who reported Anlushan was plotting treason was arrested and shipped to Anlushan in chains. Meanwhile, the interior of the empire had not fought a real war in generations. City walls crumbling, militias of shopkeepers with rusted spears. All the real swords were on the frontier, and the frontier belonged to the dancer. December 16th, 755, Fanyang, near modern Beijing. Anlushan stands before 150,000 men and unrolls a forged imperial decree. The emperor secretly commands me to march on the capital and remove the traitor Yang Guozhong. The column rolled south through the winter plains, smoke by day, torches by night. The chronicles say the ground itself shook. A poet later compressed that moment into a single line. The war drums of Suiyang came shaking the earth and shattered the song of the rainbow skirt. The music stopped. The interior didn't fight, it dissolved. Magistrates opened their gates, or ran. Some militias broke at the mere sound of the drums. 34 days. That is how long it took the rebels to cross 600 kilometers of empire and take Luoyang, the second capital. There, on Lunar New Year's Day, Anlushan put on imperial yellow and proclaimed his own dynasty, the Great Yan. One wall of mountains still stood between him and Chang'an, Tong Pass. Holding it, Geshu Han, a legendary Turkic general, half-paralyzed by a stroke, carried to the war on a litter. His plan was simple. The pass cannot be stormed. Wait. Starve them. Let the loyalist armies in the north close around the rebels like a noose. And it was working. In the north, a calm, unbreakable general named Guo Ziyi was carving up the rebel rear. Anlushan, trapped in the middle, screamed at his own advisors that they had ruined him. Then politics did what the rebels couldn't. Yang Guozhong convinced himself that a victorious Geshu Han was a bigger threat to him than the rebellion. The old emperor wanted his war over. Order after order flew from the palace. Attack, attack, attack. Geshu Han wept over the orders and marched an army of nearly 200,000 out of the impregnable pass. At Lingbao, the road squeezes into a 70-li corridor, mountains on one side, the Yellow River on the other. The rebels were waiting on the heights. Boulders first, then burning carts, choking the corridor with black smoke. Then cavalry circling in from behind. The army did not retreat. It ceased to exist. Men drowned in the Yellow River by the thousands. The histories say 6, even 7 in 10 died. Of nearly 200,000 men, about 8,000 crawled back. The next day, Tong Pass fell. The road to the capital was open. Geshu Han was dragged before Anlushan, and the legend who had never bowed knelt. The rebels executed him anyway in the end. In Chang'an, the emperor announced he would personally lead the defense of the city. Before the next dawn, he slipped out of a side gate in the dark, with Yang Guifei, Yang Guozhong, and a column of his palace guard. He didn't warn the city. Hours later, officials showed up for morning court. To an empty throne. When the world's greatest city realized its god-emperor had abandoned it, it tore itself apart before the rebels even arrived. On the road west, the exhausted escort mutinied. They hacked Yang Guozhong to pieces and forced the emperor to consent, as his own chief eunuch strangled Yang Guifei with a silk cord. The 40-year love affair that had swallowed an empire died on a roadside. Its war was just getting started. The crown prince fled north and did what desperate sons do. He declared himself Emperor Suiyang. His father found out by courier that he had been retired. What followed was not a war of grand strategy. It was a meat grinder that ran for 7 more years. We know what it felt like inside because one of China's greatest poets was trapped in it. Du Fu. Think of him as the empire's conscience holding a writing brush. Captured and held inside fallen Chang'an, he looked at the ruined capital in the spring of 757 and wrote 5 characters every Chinese child still memorizes. The state is shattered. The mountains and rivers remain. Far to the east, the war came down to one city. The Grand Canal was the empire's artery, pumping the rice, the cloth and the taxes of the untouched south into the loyalist war effort. Cut it, and the Tang starves. One city sat on that artery like a valve, Suiyang. Holding it, the city's prefect, Shu Yuan, and Zhang Shun, a county magistrate who turned out to be one of the most terrifying siege commanders in history. 6,800 men. Against a rebel army the chronicles put at 130,000. He held for 10 months, 400 engagements. When arrows ran out, he reached for a trick he had used in an earlier siege. Straw dummies dressed in black lowered down the walls at night. The rebels shot them full of arrows and rearmed the city for free. One of his archers put an arrow into the enemy commander's left eye. Then the food ran out. They ate the horses, then the sparrows and the rats, then the leather of their own armor, then bark and paper. And then, the Tang histories do not flinch here, so neither will we. Zhang Shun killed his own concubine and fed her to his starving men. The old book of Tang records that before the siege ended, 20 to 30,000 people were eaten inside Suiyang. Modern historians question the arithmetic. The record is what the record is. When the walls finally fell, 400 people were left alive. Zhang Shun refused to switch sides and died cursing the enemy to their faces. Now the cold arithmetic. Those 10 months pinned 100,000 rebels away from the south. The canal stayed open. The dynasty stayed alive. China still argues about Jiangshun today. Monster? Saint? Both. That same autumn, the empire hit back. On a plain outside Chang'an, near a temple called Xiangji, 150,000 loyalist troops under Guo Ziyi, stiffened by 4,000 Uyghur horsemen rented from the steppe, met 100,000 rebels, head-on. At first, no maneuvers, no genius, just two walls of armored men grinding into each other from noon to dusk. One loyalist officer bared his chest, took up a two-handed blade taller than a man, and carved a corridor into the rebel line. The histories say, where his blade came down, man and horse both, shattered. Then the Uyghur horsemen, hidden east of the field, slammed into the rebel rear. By nightfall, the chronicles count it, 60,000 rebel heads. Chang'an was Tang again. But read the fine print of the alliance. The land and the people would return to the Tang. The gold, the silk, and the captives belonged to the Uyghurs. Chang'an talked its way out of the bill. Luoyang's would come due later. The Tang was paying for its own cities, with its own cities. And what about Anlushan, the man who lit the fire? He never lived to see the end of it. In fact, he never saw most of it at all. Within months of taking his throne, his eyesight failed. By 757, the Emperor of Yan was completely blind. 400 pounds of him, by the history's count, raging in the dark, covered in boils, and planning to replace his grown heir with a newborn. So one January night, 3 men walked into the blind emperor's tent. The minister he had beaten, the eunuch he had castrated, and the son he was about to erase. The eunuch swung a butcher's blade into that famous belly. Blind, pinned by his own weight, Anlushan clawed for the sword that always hung by his bed. It was gone, removed hours before. His last recorded words, "This is a thief of my own house." They wrapped him in a felt rug and buried him in a pit dug under his own bed. No coffin, no mourning. Remember this scene. It is about to repeat like a curse. The son, An Qing-shu, was a drunk. The Tang cornered him at Yecheng with a colossal army, 600,000 men, the chronicles claim. And here the court showed its rot. Too jealous of Guo Ziyi to give him supreme command, it placed the whole army under the eye of a palace eunuch. A freak sandstorm hit at the worst hour. The leaderless giant simply scattered. The court needed someone to blame. It picked its best general and sent Guo Ziyi home. The man who picked up the rebel pieces was Anlushan's oldest comrade, Shi Siming. Colder, sharper, more patient. He embraced the drunk, toasted him, then had him strangled along with his brothers, and took the Yan throne for himself. Emperor number 2, dead by the hand of his own side. 2 years later, Shi Siming gave his own son a deadline: build a fortress in 1 day or be executed. The son did the math on his own survival. That night, his officers dragged the sleeping emperor of Yan from his bed and strangled him with a bowstring. Emperor number 3. The 4th emperor, Shi Chaoyi, inherited a rebellion that was devouring itself alive. In 762, the Tang rented the Uyghur cavalry one more time and took Luoyang back for good. Then the allies collected their fee. The chronicle entry for the empire's second city reads, "Tens of thousands dead, fires that burned for weeks, survivors dressed in paper, the Uyghurs plundered, the Tang's own soldiers plundered right beside them." And that was a city on the Tang's own side. One by one, his generals sold the last emperor to the Tang for amnesty and governorships. One of them shipped the emperor's own mother and wife to the Tang court as a gift. In the first weeks of 763, out of roads, out of men, out of family, the last emperor of Yan rode into a forest and hanged himself. A subordinate cut off his head and mailed it to Chang'an. 7 brutal years. 4 emperors of Yan. A father gutted on the orders of his son. That son strangled by his father's best friend. The friend strangled on the orders of his son. And that son hanging alone in the trees. The Tang claimed the victory, but no Tang blade ever touched a single one of Yan's 4 emperors. The rebellion ate itself. There was no victory parade. That same year, a Tibetan army rode through the stripped, undefended west and took Chang'an. Again. The new emperor fled his own capital. Again. Fleeing the capital was becoming a Tang family tradition. Once again, it was Guozi they came crawling back to. The old general scraped together a few thousand stragglers, lit enough campfires at night for an army 10 times that size, and bluffed the Tibetans out of the capital. On the empire's far western frontier, the Silk Road garrisons, bled dry to fight the rebellion, fell to Tibet one by one. And the rebel warlords who surrendered? The Tang was too broken to destroy them, so it did the only thing it could. It made them governors. The same warlords, the same private armies, the same provinces, now handed down to their sons like little kingdoms. And the court could only watch. The rebellion was crushed, but the warlord provinces it left behind would fester for another century and a half, until one day they finally tore the Tang apart. Then there is the ledger. The imperial census of 754 counted nearly 53 million registered souls. The census of 764, 1 year after the war, found 16,900,000, 36 million people, missing from the books. How many were corpses, and how many were refugees a broken government could simply no longer count. Historians still fight about it today. Even the cautious modern estimates still speak of millions upon millions dead. And counting by that census collapse, some scholars have ranked this war proportionally as the deadliest catastrophe human beings ever inflicted on themselves. 1/6 of every man, woman and child on Earth. The dynasty survived, but the golden age it was built on was gone forever. Because the most terrifying part of this war was never the number. It was that everyone, the court and the rebels alike, had gone mad. And when the smoke cleared, there was no winner at all. So, one last question. In all that madness, who do you think was the real fool? Tell me in the comments below. Welcome to The Dragon Files. Subscribe for more.